When somebody says you have a pricing problem, more often than not, what you have is a value proposition.
Value problem. Yeah.
Brand value equals as your numerator experience and as your denominator price. The greater the delta between your experience to price, the greater brand value you have and ultimately brand love you're going to get. When you stay at the Ritz-Carlton, you're not thinking about how much you're paying at the Ritz-Carlton. When you stay at a Courtyard Marriott and you walk in and your room isn't ready and the Wi-Fi sucks and the towels are as big as an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, it doesn't matter that it's $99. You're upset. Once you're married 20 years, are you still wooing? The key to a successful marriage is you never stop the woo.
So, hey, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliant Commerce Podcast, where I get a chance to sit down with some of the brightest minds in commerce behind today's iconic, or as I like to say, next to be iconic brands. And we've been talking a lot with D2C, traditional D2C operators lately, founders, VPs, CMOs, who grew up in the performance era. Today, I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. I wanted to talk to someone who's built brand love from a completely different angle. So joining me today is Doug Zarkin, CMO of Take 5 Oil Change. Doug, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, bud. Appreciate it.
Where am I catching you today?
I am in the global headquarters of Take 5 Marketing, otherwise known as the basement of my house here on Long Island. It's outside New York City.
Awesome. So Take 5, take 5 minutes and tell me a little bit about the brand.
Sure. Take 5, the stay in your car 10-minute oil change. Roughly 1,400 locations, national brand, primarily in the South, Southeast, Northwest. What we focus on is fast, friendly, simple. We take the pressure and the frustration out of getting your oil changed. I mean, look, that oil light goes off. It's one more thing that you got to do on your calendar and what is inevitably a very busy schedule. And so we take the stress out. You pull right in, we hand you a smile and a water. You get to see everything, be a part of everything. Nothing's a surprise, and you're in and out in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and you're skipping the opportunity to be upsold too when the dealer's calling you and harassing you for oil change. And like suddenly a $50 bill becomes a $500 bill because you bought a bunch of things that are unnecessary.
100%. I mean, we do more than just oil changes. We do tire pressure check, oil, fluid top offs. But at the end of the day, our bread and butter is really providing that comprehensive and expert oil change.
Yeah, I love it. But not just Take 5. As I was doing a little bit of research getting ready for this, like you've had a pretty interesting career at some amazing places. So yeah, maybe outside of Take 5, like what got you here? Tell us a little bit more about your
I think
career
I'm
arc.
probably the first guest that can say, and I can say this with confidence, that he knows how to change oil and he was an Avon lady. So I've had
I
a
love that.
pretty diverse set of experiences, both in and out of the brick and mortar world. Grew up in the agency business, spent my first career in advertising, eventually launching the youth and entertainment division of Gray Advertising. Then went to the client side to go to Avon to actually help them to reinvent their direct selling model, launching the Mark brand for young women, scaled that business to a little over 120 million in about a year and a half, and then went over to a small little business called Victoria's Secret, where I was the head of marketing for their pink business. Took that brand nationally, spent a few years in the wholesale fashion industry. But the bulk of my client side career prior to coming to Driven Brands and Take 5 was at EssilorLuxottica, where I was the CMO of Pearl Vision, where I led an 11-year transformation of that business into number one quality of care, the number one eye care brand, top 10% of all franchise brands as rated by Entrepreneurs 500. So super proud of that work and even more excited about sort of taking those skills and bringing them to this business, which is incredibly unique and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down here in my notebook that you are, without a doubt, the most non-direct to consumer guest I've ever had, and I'm curious what someone who is a career franchise CMO what are like one or two lessons that you teach the D2C generation when you come across them at conferences or on
Yeah.
phone calls or networking or anything like that?
So I'll give you two lessons. The first thing is data doesn't make decisions for the modern day marketer.
Hmm.
Modern day marketer uses data to make decisions because data is only as good as the questions that you ask. And if you are making every decision by sitting behind a computer screen and looking at crosstabs and Excel charts and PowerPoint slides, and you aren't getting into the live of your business, whether that live is working the customer service phone line, whether that's working chat, or whether that's actually working in brick and mortar, you are missing where the ripe data lies. And
Hmm.
so I always caution folks that are in an e-com world, become a frontline associate in any way, shape, or form you can.
Yeah.
The second thing is when it comes to the philosophy of how you're building your brand, whether you are a brick and mortar business, omni-channel, or straight e-com, I like to apply something that I talk about in my book called the thinking human philosophy. Thinking human is grounded in the notion of treating every customer that comes into your business as if they are the only customer that's coming in that day. What does the ecosystem look like that you're building if you keep that philosophy in mind? It doesn't become customer service as triage. It becomes an enhancement opportunity to strengthen trust. It sort of level sets how you think about warranties, how you think about discounting, how you think about the conversation that you're having with your customers, both live, but also on the web as well. So thinking human is really something that I've built my career on. It's something I talk about in my book, Moving Your Brand Out of the Friend Zone, as a foundational pillar of how to build an effective marketing stack and to create brand love.
Yeah. So, I mean, sitting at the center of that marketing stack, if I'm understanding correctly, is this connection with the customer, like that is rooted in something that is human. And I think if there is something that you sort of we can fault the performance generation of and from, it's think about some of the language we use, like targeting. Like targeting doesn't seem to me to be so focused on the human. It's more about sort of like winning an equation
Right.
or it's arbitrage. And there's a reason I say iconic brands are next to be iconic brands. I think those are the brands that do understand their customer, that have that sort of that strongest connection. So I like this that best practice or that advice around you can't be 100% data driven.
Yeah.
And how do we look at data? How do we be data informed? But ultimately, how do we keep our customer sort of at the center of everything that we do?
Phenomenal point. Well, the first thing is that, we live in an age that almost everything can be measured. And there is a
Yeah,
very big misnomer that because it can be measured means that it's meaningful. And that is
right.
not the case. Not
Yeah,
everything that can be measured is meaningful. And so I like to think about the big five. If you are measuring more than five key KPIs, you're likely going to spend 20% of less than 20% of your time on each of those, which means you're not going to be able to move the needle on any of them.
mm,
So identify the key five. Once you've identified the key five, within the key five, you can drill down into 5A, 5B, 5C. But what are the five things that are really going to drive your business, and be relentless in your pursuit of excellence there?
yeah, yeah. Relentless is a term that I adore. I've been using it all the time with my team. Maybe even listening in on some of our calls this week. Yeah, I think that is great. Just because we can measure it doesn't necessarily mean we should. And I think there is a dilution as you go, whether it's three, four, or five, whether you go beyond that. I talk to brands all the time too, who almost feel like they're drowning in data.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at it and trying to move the needle, what they're trying to do is sort of figure out why the numbers are different. I'm tracking this KPI here, I'm tracking a similar KPI over there. The numbers are different. And instead of getting closer to my customer or getting closer to making a decision, I'm spending all of this time trying to get to the bottom of why the numbers might be different.
The
So I
key to
think there's a
complex business,
discipline there.
yeah, I mean, the key to complex business problems always lies in the simplicity of what the answer is.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you are facing a big screen of dashboards and charts, it's almost impossible to see the connecting points.
Sure.
Um, what you've got to really try to do is to figure out, again, what are the key things that drive your business, and really understand the layers that go into it. And then you'll become a master of your data,
Hmm.
and you'll be able to use it for good, not for evil.
Yeah, I like that. Whether it's your brick and mortar or your D2C, I think those are lessons that apply universally. And maybe that's a good segue to. It sounds like in the couple minutes we've already been talking, you're definitely someone who is a kind of a framework thinker, and I have read about this framework that that you're well known for, the brand value
Oh
equation.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's unpack that for a sec. I'd be curious to hear
If
how
there's
that developed and how you use it.
if there's anything in the book that's worth remembering, it's the brand value equation. And for me in creating it, it's a very simple construct, which is whether you are making 50,000, 500,000, $5 million a year, everybody wants brand value. And brand value equals as your numerator experience and as your denominator price. The greater the delta between your experience to price, the greater brand value you have and ultimately brand love you're going to get. It's liberating because, if you walked into McDonald's, I'm just going to pick on them because it's the first brand that comes to mind, and they wanted to charge you $10 for a hamburger,
Yep.
you probably would go, not going to do it. If you walked into Smith & Wollensky's, Morton's, any fine steakhouse, and they wanted to charge you $10 for a hamburger, you'd be like, that's sick.
You'd be there
Absolutely.
every day for lunch.
Every day
Every
for lunch.
day. Yeah.
So, and why is that? It's not just the quality of the meat, but it's the experience. It's the linen tablecloths. It's the environment. Experience matters. And if you
Mhm.
deliver an amazing experience, you can charge whatever the hell you want. So
Yeah.
as long as that ratio is 4-to-1, 5-to-1, you can be somewhat generous with your pricing strategy because the consumer is really going to, at the end of the day, come away with, wow, I got a lot of value. When you stay at the Ritz-Carlton, you're not thinking about how much you're paying at the Ritz-Carlton. When you stay at a Courtyard Marriott and you walk in and your room isn't ready and the Wi-Fi sucks and the towels are as big as 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, it doesn't matter that it's $99. You're upset. You feel like you got
Yeah.
for a ride. So
Right.
it just kind of refocuses brands and brand marketers on what is most important. When somebody says you have a pricing problem, more often than not, what you have is a value proposition.
Value problem. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so how do you measure that over time? So you have a framework. Like
How do you
how do you
measure
do
the
it at
framework?
Take
Yeah,
Five?
great
Yeah.
question. So you could do brand health studies. Like we do a brand health tracker at Take Five, where we're measuring awareness, consideration, sentiment. Google Star scores are probably the most aggressive way to measure it. You know, I call it reputation commerce. There's a whole chapter in the book about it. And star scores are shoppable reputation. You know, most consumers today have the opportunity to kind of strap on their beer muscles if they want to send you something on Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever you want to call threads. Um, but when they leave you a review, a Google review, they have to have a Gmail and they're assigning an identity to that point of view. And it is invaluable. What your star score is may not be the actuality, but it is the reality of what is happening. And if you take stock of it, you'll have a very good sense of what your brand value equation is and what your brand health is.
Yeah. I mean, especially when it's so public that
Yep.
way. I mean, it absolutely becomes something that you need to manage. I would imagine too that this notion of value, while important on that first purchase, is got to be crucial when you think about what it's going to take for someone to either come back and buy again or book another appointment, or I think in the way that a lot of brands have grown, where you've got this durable following because people love you. Why they're going to not just tell their family, but they're going to tell all their friends.
It is a Harvard study calls out, and I can't remember which one, that it is between 5 and 25 times more expensive to acquire a customer than it is to retain one.
Mm.
And so ask yourselves, for all of these subscription services, why do they give the best deals to the new members? Why aren't they giving the best deals to the renewals? When Sirius hits you up for their auto renew, your promotional rate goes up 5 times.
Yeah.
Why? Thank you for your service. We're going to screw you on the pricing. Doesn't make any sense.
Well, because it's the implicit in that is that the switching cost is high, and customers are lazy, and so if we can manage to hook them, if we can again, it's like the language about keeping the customer in the center.
Right.
We manage to get them in, they're not gonna want to abandon us. Well, how would it feel if we turn that on its head and sort of said like we got them in, That's now we just get started in establishing a relationship with this customer so that they love us. So we make
You,
the renewal easy.
you just nailed it. I mean, it's a relationship. I mean, think about your personal life. You meet someone, you date, you're on your best behavior, the wooing is there.
Yeah.
Once you're married 20 years, are you still wooing? The key to a
Yeah.
successful marriage is you never stop the woo. You
Yeah.
always have to think about how you're reminding that person why they love you. And that doesn't mean grand gestures, it's actually small moments.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the same thing in business. And finding the opportunity to say thank you, to express gratitude, to offer a little bit of value um, each and every time you come.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds so obvious when you say it. And the way that I think about this sometimes, or the advice that I'll offer up is, I want to work with brands who treat their customers in the way that I want to be treated.
Yeah.
And I have a pretty high bar for that, whether it's the way that you're using my data to make my experience better, to make the product better, like just do right by me, and I'm going to keep coming back, because you have
Mhm.
proven to me that you care about that relationship. And I think it is an investment. And I look at some of the brands that I've been a customer of for a decade or more. It's because they get that
Yeah.
equation right. Yeah, it really hit home. I mean, sometimes it's like the distilling it down to something that is super simple just makes an awful lot of sense. But
The answer to
yeah,
complexity often lies in simplicity.
yeah. So let's segue again. I mean, you just keep setting me up here. You literally wrote the book on this, Doug. And so tell me a little bit about that. What was the transition like from CMO to author?
When you put something out into the world in print, not only do you have to stand behind it, but it is very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
For me, the one thing I cannot spell. I cannot spell, and I am a multiple assault and battery victim of autocorrect. So my
Mm.
biggest fear was writing this book, even though having it proofread and still having autocorrect, take the culmination of a chapter where I meant to say, and this is why you don't do it, and have it say, this is why you do it. And so I probably tortured myself. I wrote the book in 16 weeks.
Okay.
I wrote every day. It was during, I had just left Pearl Vision and took the summer to really write the book before starting my next gig. And for me, it was very cathartic. It gave me an opportunity to kind of go inside to figure out all the things that I wanted to share with people to help them avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked with some amazing people. I've also worked with some of the worst bosses on the planet. And you learn as much from the terrible people that you work for as you do the gracious and, God's gift people that you do work with. Um, and how do you take all that and package it? You know, for me, the book's been out for a little while, and what I love about it is that when people read it, they have an understanding of who I am as a human being, not just as a marketer. And that's something I'm really proud of. I'm a husband and a father. I've got a daughter that's a freshman in college. My son is a sophomore in high school. I've taught in both their business classes before, and I'm not sure they fully understand what I do for a living, but they know I'm kind of pretty good at it. And
Yeah.
their friends are like, you should read the book because it's good. So
Yeah.
it's something to be proud of.
For
And
sure.
certainly, you know, I would encourage somebody to write a book if you feel like you have something to say and are willing and able to be vulnerable in how you say it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is awesome. Must have been a pretty special feeling to walk in and teach a class where your kids were in the audience.
Look,
Yeah.
I've been very lucky. My work at Pearl Vision is the subject of a Harvard Business School case on brand rejuvenation, but there is
Mm.
no more terrifying experience than walking into the incubator business class of your child's high school and sitting in a room with them and all of their friends, half of which you used to coach in lacrosse or baseball, and having them look at you and be like, "Wow, you know what? He's kind of interesting." So
Yeah.
it's been very cathartic for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember being invited to speak in an MBA class, and the professor was an old customer of mine, like a decade ago, and I remember feeling this overwhelming sensation of sort of imposter syndrome, like, why is she inviting me to talk to this MBA class? And so like the first 5 minutes were nerve wracking, or it probably wasn't 5 minutes, it was probably 45 seconds before settling in and realizing that I had an awful lot to offer as I looked back. And it was a really kind of like a humbling experience. And I think I took a similar approach that you're describing in your book. It's one thing to stand up there and just tell everyone what you think they want to hear. But if you can be honest and vulnerable and talk about your lessons and the mistakes that you've made and the things that you've learned from it, you're potentially saving people from making the same mistakes that ultimately that
I mean, look,
you have made.
people, you are a brand. Every one of us is a brand. And, especially when you're talking to high school kids that are looking to figure out how to market themselves to the college of their choice, giving them a sense of how to think about themselves, not what to think about themselves, but how to think about themselves is helpful. And, I'm very involved in a few mentoring programs, both at the high school and college level right now. And I get a lot of joy out of it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, sometimes when you get an opportunity, I've always found you get an opportunity to teach something, it forces me to always be learning,
Yep.
in a sort of a weird kind of way. So, I wrote, I contributed 2 chapters to a book in 2000 or 2001, and then I co-authored a book in a similar time period. Uh, I'm going to date myself here, but I wrote on the subject of Flash, if you remember back then,
Oh, yeah.
and a technology called cold fusion. So I didn't really put myself out there because those technologies didn't stay relevant for too long. You certainly have in yours, and I'm curious if there was a chapter or two in the book that you think has the greatest chance of being evergreen. What are those chapters?
So I think the chapter on thinking human, I think probably because it's a philosophy that I think is timeless.
Yeah,
I think the brand value equation, um, I think the to me, the introduction of the book, even though it's not a chapter, really sets the tone for the entire book. I'll tell you the story. Um, I had to turn the book in Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. And Saturday of Labor Day weekend, I had kind of the final manuscript, and I hadn't read the entire book cover to cover because you write in sections.
yeah,
I was writing in bits and pieces. I had the outline for the book, and I wrote the title of the book I had in 15 minutes, and I had the chapter titles in about 20 minutes, but I had to write every chapter. And so I remember sitting at the pool with like a hard copy of like printed out, almost like PowerPoint slides. And I'm reading the introduction and I'm like, making some notes on it. And I get to chapter one and I'm reading it and I'm like, okay. And I got to chapter two and I'm like, this is really boring. And I said to
mm,
my wife, I'm going home. And she's like, what do you mean? I go, I got to go home and write. And I rewrote the first three chapters of the book, including the introduction, in about 5 hours.
yeah,
And I realized, because I knew what the story was, I
yep,
realized that if I didn't tell a great story at the beginning, no one would continue with it. It's kind of like if
mm,
you've ever gone to a movie and the first 15 minutes suck, you really got to pray that someone's just going to stick it out because they paid $20 for a movie ticket. With this, I wanted to make sure that from page one, paragraph one, I got you to lean in.
so you had that.
And I've gotten some nice feedback that maybe I've done that. So, crisis of confidence happens to anybody. I'm glad I had that epiphany moment and a little bit of that humility to say, you know what, good isn't great. I want to make it great. And I hope
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like you, struggle sometimes to go back and listen to something or to read something longer form that I've written, and I obsess over these things. But just having the grit to sit down and rewrite it to hook people in, I think that's awesome. Cool. I mean, this is a little bit of a segue. I've got a bunch of notes here, but you talked an awful lot about the human side of things, the reputational commerce. I'm curious in the era of AI,
Mhm.
as we start to move away from the human and we have human assistants. How you think about that in terms of when you're building a brand, where does that come in? Where it's maybe not always the human that has the relationship with the brand that helps with discovery, and maybe this is where the kind of like the your roots as a marketer and all of this experience can be directly applicable to this era that we're moving into.
So, technology like data can be used for good or be used for evil. Um, an algorithm is only as good as the information that is fed into it.
Right.
AI is not going to replace the modern day marketer. It is going to enable us to have perhaps more choices and options. It's going to enable us to articulate things in different ways. Um, it may allow us to go faster, but sometimes you go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
Um, it is a tool that you have to master. I'm a tennis player. It's my hobby. It's my passion. It's one of the few things in my life that I wish I was better at because I put a lot of time into it. Um, because you have a great serve doesn't mean you don't have to have a good forehand. AI is not going to replace having a good forehand. It just
Mhm.
means that you now have a good serve.
Yeah.
It still goes back to customer insights. Marketing's job is to motivate the consumer to do what we need them to do when we need them to do it. To do that, you cannot just simply automate everything. If you
Yeah.
could, then everybody would do it. You
Yeah.
know,
There
there's
won't have to be a
enough.
race to the middle. There's
Well,
automation, but there's also sort of like just something that is
thi-
ultimately generic and
think
isn't
about
going to
the
resonate.
think about the stock market and how much information people who play the stock market have had at their disposal for decades. They still don't know what the hell's going to happen.
Yeah.
You
So
know, think about weather modeling. The best part of being a meteorologist is you can be right 50% of the time.
yeah, and still be great.
So even with all the data in the world, even with all the tools in the world, the reality is you need somebody behind the screen who understands what the hell they're doing.
Yeah. Have you shifted your approach at Take Five now in terms of how you're thinking about those reviews to the point you made about the algorithm only being as good as the information that it's fed? How much do you and the team think about that now
A
as a
lot.
as
We think
a
about it a
lot?
lot, but we know that for the algorithm, like for SEO, as a good example, we know SEO crawls content. That content has to be written so it's relevant. Yes, you have to understand how to write for SEO, but you also have to write content that's going to be clickable, content that's going to be shareable, content that's going to be meaningful. So it requires you to balance sort of art and science. We spend a lot of time thinking about not how to game the system, but to how to play in the system. The house is always going to win at blackjack. Counting cards only works for so long. And when it comes to technology, if you try to count cards, inevitably you're going to lose. So the
Mhm.
best thing to know is you got to know how to play the game.
Yeah,
You don't split tens. I don't care what you're counting. You don't split tens in blackjack. So
ever.
ever,
Even when the dealer has a six.
absolutely. Even when you're on a hot streak.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to apply that humanity into playing the algorithmic game. I get really sort of twisted when I talk to media people and like, oh, we're going to let the algorithm set. No, absolutely not. I need somebody hands on keyboard who is working it, who is looking at the results, who is factoring in what we know about our consumer, because we are getting smarter about our consumer every single day. The arrogance to be a marketer has to be paired with the humility to realize that you will never know everything about your consumer. You
Yeah.
can strive to, but you will never know everything about your consumer.
Yeah, they will consistently surprise you. That has been my experience.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, so I like that. So then is it fair to say in all things AI, you are thinking about it, but ultimately it doesn't replace the hard work that brands need to do to keep humans in the center of everything that you do.
I think
It really brings us back to that brand value equation.
that's an on point synopsis for sure.
Awesome. That's probably a good place to wrap us up, Doug. This was awesome.
Thanks, man.
I expected maybe a little bit more of a delta between D2C and on the channel, but ultimately when it comes to building brands, yeah, really fortunate to have had today's conversation. You're absolutely one of the sharpest minds out there. So thanks for joining us. And maybe before I let you go, where can I find the book?
Oh, it's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. And if you want to find out more information about it, you can go to dougzarkin.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.